Okay, so you're here because you want to know what's going on.
Yeah,
You want to cut through all that noise out there and get right to the point.
exactly.
And that's what we're doing today with what we like to call a deep dive into this recent signal scandal.
Yeah, we've been looking at articles from and also a CNN analysis from Erie News now.
Right.
And we want to take all this controversy and give you the key insights.
Mm-hmm.
Why does it matter to you? We don't want to get bogged down in all those details.
Right.
Just the stuff that's important.
Right. So maybe just to start us off, the core of this whole thing is that The Atlantic published a Signal group chat
Right.
that involved White House and national security officials.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, the White House said there was no classified information being shared through these channels.
Right. And it wasn't just any old communication.
Right.
This particular chat, which CNN reporters later annotated after it was released, included stuff from the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, and he was sharing details about F-18s and drones that were being prepared for strikes.
Right.
And even the name of the chat itself had Houthi in it. So clearly indicating the target in Yemen.
Right. So that's pretty specific.
Yeah.
And then even after all of this came out, both the White House and Hegseth, they're saying, no, it wasn't classified information.
Right.
It was just sensitive information.
Exactly. And that's where these experts come in. People like retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmett and CNN national security analyst Beth Sanner.
Right.
They give us the real breakdown of what's going on here.
And Kimmett says that the real question is not whether it was technically classified, but whether it should have been classified at all. And he even acknowledges that Hegseth has the authority to declassify information.
Right.
But he emphasizes the fact that that doesn't really solve the fundamental problem
Right.
here, which is that it's really sensitive information.
It's not just about checking a box. It's about the inherent sensitivity of the information itself.
Exactly.
Sanner has a really simple way of looking at this. If you wouldn't feel comfortable putting something in an unclassified email,
Right.
then you should treat it as classified.
That's a good point.
And she also uses what she calls the Moscow or Beijing test.
Okay.
Would our adversaries be really happy to get their hands on this information?
Yeah. Would they think it's valuable?
Yeah, in this case, it seems like they probably would.
Right. So what kinds of specific things would they be interested in here?
Well, the biggest one is the operational details. The
Of
fact
that.
that he's talking about planes and drones moving to attack.
Right.
Sanner says this kind of information is inherently classified. Even without knowing the targets, if they know the timing and the direction, it
Right.
lets them anticipate our attacks.
Makes sense.
Maybe move their own assets out of the way, or even just gather intelligence about how we operate. And even though Hegseth might have been able to declassify this stuff, there's actually a process that you have to go through, and it doesn't seem like that happened.
Right. And it wasn't just about the movements.
Right.
There were also these conversations in the chat.
Right. The back and forth
Yeah.
between Vance and Hegseth.
And that kind of gave a look into how U.S. policy is made.
Yeah, or how maybe it wasn't made so well in this case.
Right.
Sanner's really concerned that our adversaries have now seen that maybe our deliberations weren't complete. Imagine a debate and someone raises a red flag, but that concern never makes it to the person who's actually making the decision.
Right.
If an adversary knew about that unaddressed concern, they might be able to exploit it.
Right.
And the fact that Vance raised concerns about the strike in the chat, and there's no evidence that those concerns were escalated to the president, that's a big problem.
That's a very good point.
So there's been this whole debate about whether the information that was shared was a war plan.
Right. Because the White House and Hegseth said it wasn't.
Right, even though they were talking about timing and targets and how the attack would happen.
Right.
Well, Kimmett says there's a difference between war plans and operational plans.
Okay.
War plans are bigger,
Mm.
more preparatory,
Right.
for future scenarios.
Okay.
But operational plans, those are the specifics of an attack, like what was being discussed in the chat.
Yeah.
And those are way more sensitive because they're active, they're happening right now,
Makes sense.
and they involve the safety of our people.
So what they were talking about was much closer to an operational plan.
Exactly.
Okay. And this all leads to concerns about the risks to U.S. service members.
Right.
And Democratic members of Congress have even spoken out about this.
Kimmett has an interesting take on this. He says, Signal is pretty secure,
Okay.
and that the operation they were talking about actually went well. He also says that the Army is pretty forgiving if someone makes a mistake, but nobody gets hurt. But that doesn't mean there weren't any risks.
Right. Right. So it was a risky thing to do, even if it worked out okay this time.
Exactly.
So what's the big picture here?
Well, Kimmett says the White House is messing up
Okay.
by trying to downplay this whole thing.
Right.
He thinks they should just admit they made a mistake, fix it, and make sure it doesn't happen again, instead of trying to hide it.
Interesting. And Sander agrees.
Yeah, she's also worried about how casual people are being about using apps like Signal for government business.
Right.
And she points out that Steve Witkoff, the Middle East envoy, and Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, were in other countries when some of this chat was happening.
Right.
That's a huge security risk.
Yeah. Their phones could have been compromised.
Exactly. And even if Signal is encrypted, someone still has to access the chat on each end.
Right.
And what if their device is compromised?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It doesn't matter how secure the app is if the device itself isn't secure.
Right. And Sander says this shouldn't be a partisan issue. It's a chance for everyone to work together.
Right.
And make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again.
And she thinks that all the political fighting is actually making it harder to fix the problem.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the big takeaway?
Regardless of whether the information was technically classified, the chat still revealed sensitive details about U.S. military operations and how decisions are made.
And it shows that there are some big problems with how the government is handling this kind of information.
And the experts agree.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be more careful and put better systems in place to keep this information safe.
That makes sense. And it makes me think about how in this world where we can talk to anyone instantly, we have to find that balance between convenience and security.
It's not just about the government, it's about all of us and how we handle sensitive information in this crazy connected world.
That's something to think about.
Yeah, it really is.
Well, that's it for our deep dive today. Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you next time. Bye.